Scott Harrison is the founder of Charity Water, a one-year-old effort to bring clean drinking water to some of the more than 1 billion people on the planet who don't have it. So far, there are 206 wells already complete or in progress. 100,000 people or more you've brought water to. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I guess you have to start with how it started for you. You at some point decided you wanted to do good, but then how did you get to water as the way to do good?
It's a very long story. I'll try and make it sort of brief. When I was 18, I moved to New York. I was in a band that did pretty well, and then eventually broke up, as bands do, because we hated each other. And, there were a couple druggies in the band. And I wound up getting into promoting nightclubs pretty successfully. Did that for about a decade, throwing high-profile fashion parties and music parties. And sort of had that perfect life at 28. Woke up on a beach in South America, and
your epiphany moment.
Yeah, it was miserable. I was, everything should have been right, and
I've read where you said this, but miserable how?
Yeah, miserable in like soulless. I was the most selfish person I knew. I was raised in a household with my parents were just sort of Christians, and so I had walked away from all of that, all my faith, and sort of anything having to do with Christianity this decade in New York. It was just, gosh, I remember like this weird, 2 weeks where I was like reading theology during the day and doing tons of drugs at night,
Yeah.
And it was just sort of push-pull for my life, I guess. And, I started praying and, wondering like what the opposite of my life would look like. And came back to New York, and I was determined to get out of it. And a few months later, I just did. I left everything in New York and decided to do a year of humanitarian service. I found this incredible opportunity to be a photographer with this organization in Liberia. At the time, Liberia was coming out of a 14-year civil war and was a disaster. So I went, picked up a camera, read the manual, and joined as a volunteer with these doctors.
So you went and lived on a converted cruise ship for a year, right?
Yeah, 8 months.
Okay. How did that get you to water, though?
Right. So one of the things the ship did was, I guess they figured at some point, hey, we're doctors and we're really good at that, but we're also in these countries that have, the medical access isn't the only problem. So they had a well drilling. It wasn't a drilling; it was a well digging sort of operation, and I think it was like $2,000 at the time. And to go into a community, seeing people drinking mud, scummy sort of ponds, and then a month later, after a whole community effort, drinking clean water, made a real impact on me. For a few $1,000s, we could touch 500 lives. That was just really interesting to me.
So you come back after your almost year, and I went away for a year, but not to do the type of good you did. But I think the part I can relate to is the idea that you come back, and it's a very different world, and it's maybe a world that you used to really like that you don't want to stay in for another week if you don't have to. One
thing that had bothered me on the ship was everyone talking about going home and culture shock, and I was like, I'm not going to be culture shocked. I used to sell $300 bottles of vodka. I used to be one of those. Nothing will shock me. How expensive anything is, or people throwing money away just won't shock me. I dated a girl that bought $5,000 handbags, and so anyway, so I wind up on the. No, I didn't buy them for her. So I wound up on the roof, and a $16 cocktail sort of shocked me. And I found myself talking about how $16 in Liberia could feed 4 people for a month, and everybody listened. And one of the things that I'd heard on the ship is when you go back, people don't care about Africa. They don't care about your stories.
I found that people don't care.
So everybody listened to me.
Yeah.
And I think part of that was because probably because they knew me before, and maybe they were so interested in like, dude, I partied with that guy. What's he doing?
Yeah.
Spending that much time.
Did you have trouble relating to them? You're like, oh my God, these people I used to be so close to have their priorities so messed up.
Well, I made a decision like really early on that it was going to go one of two ways. I was either going to just be judgmental and say like, how dare you? There's kids dying in Africa. How dare you spend that money? Or I could look at it as opportunity and say, hey, someone that has $16 for a cocktail, has $16 for a bag of rice, or has enough resources they can get a couple $1,000s together to build a well. So I think that shift happened like in the first couple days, and I was like, wow, this is great. We're going to make a killing.
Yeah.
And
that's really, it seems like the story of Charity Water and you is that you left that party planning life, but you brought the skill set and the Rolodex with you. And that's why you've been able to sell all these $20 bottles of water to people that have $20 to spare.
Yeah. I mean, it's, it's not lost on me. It's sort of cool. One of my customers that I used to sell bottle tables to just gave $25,000 a few weeks ago, which was great. And he'd just been sort of, by the sidelines for a couple years, just checking us out, and said, "Wow, it's for real,"
Where did the idea of the $20 bottle come from? Was it the seed that everything else sprouted from, or was it just a good idea?
It was sort of a throwaway idea. I think I was at a club, and a club owner says, I don't even remember how the idea came, but $20 seemed like the perfect sort of, screw you number. It's like, give us $20 for a bottle of water. But we'll use all the money to build wells.
Yeah.
And hey, if we sell a couple hundred bottles of water, which seemed like an achievable thing to do, a whole community in Africa will get clean water. So I remember we just put up simple 3 pictures and a little TV that played a loop of wells being built, and it worked. People they love the idea of reading about a story and seeing, oh, okay, I understand how a community without access to clean water can get clean water. And we were surprised at how well it worked. I think we raised 11 grand. I go back to live in Liberia for another 6 months, and a lot of people thought it was a fad, and my friends were really disenchanted with charity. So talking to them, they said, oh, well, we're not giving because X. Everyone seemed to have a horror story about normally a larger organization spending too much on their admin, and only 20 cents of their dollar reaching.
As someone who's been doing this for just a year, and you see it growing, do you start to understand where charities go wrong, or where people think they're doing something wrong, but really it's not nefarious? Because good intentioned people go into charities, and then either bad things or things that seem bad happen.
Yeah.
Maybe you have an idea why.
I think a lot of it is just growth. Running an organization with 950 people, is a lot different than running an organization with 3 or with 4, or even with 9. So an organization might make an appeal for something, and then 5 times as much money comes in. So they take the surplus, 4 times as much money, and then often put it back into their own infrastructure. Well, that's not what the donor meant to happen. The donor was giving, to aid victims of, of a disaster in a lot of cases. So I was hearing this, and it was right when Katrina was happening that our show was up. And, I wanted to go and prove to my friends that Mercy Ships would not turn into a fabulous yacht. So I lived there for another 6 months and just tried to use the camera to connect the donors, i.e. my friends, to the work that was being done. And then I came back and decided that I wanted to, to do it for real and do it for the rest of my life. And I had learned a little more about water, again, seeing these wells built. It is the #1 issue facing the poor. 80% of all disease is caused by bad water and lack of sanitation.